Hello, everybody. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic host of Bachelor Nation News. We have an update on the Clayton Echard paternity scandal. As you guys know, we've been committed to getting you all the news just to make sure this case doesn't go away, people don't lose interest, and we continue to shed light on this wild story. Clayton Echard thanks media following lack of media coverage. I think he's just happy that it's finally coming, even though the last 7 months have probably been utter hell. I guess over 9 months, actually. Either way, we've got his response, and then I'm going to share what a psychologist is saying about some terms that may be used to describe what the heck is going on out here. Follow me on Instagram at DNeals. I'm also on the podcast Bachelor Rush Hour morning and afternoon. And don't forget, you can check me out March 28th at the Desert Ridge Improv. It's a brand new, amazing stand-up comedy club. Great food. I know this because it's a franchise all over the country. They're absolutely fantastic. I'll be doing a longer set there. Dave Neal and Friends with Clayton Echard from The Bachelor. That's right. Clayton will join me on stage. You can get your tickets for that now. Tell your friends, tell your family. I appreciate all the support. All right. And speaking of which, here was the article that came out from Us Weekly. Clayton Echard has released a statement ahead of his paternity trial. Read his updated stance on the sham claims that he got a woman pregnant with twins. So this comes out, of course, because of the great work they and their legal team have done to make this press release. Now, I'm going to share what Clayton said in response, but I have to say, this isn't a win for journalism, all right? Now, don't get me wrong. Us Weekly is not the venue that writes large exposés about injustice. That would have been like a Rolling Stones or Vice Magazine or New York Times, LA Times. They are the people with the bandwidth to tell this story. Why the hell the LA Times didn't tell this story is beyond me. I hate to even dive into conspiracies, but it feels to me as though this story didn't exactly fit whatever, I don't know, public interest some media companies think we have. And by that, I mean completely a gender issue. Why is it a big deal for him to get thrown under the bus? And even though if the roles were reversed, it would have been an absolute national news story. I think people are afraid to talk about that aspect. I don't know why. I hate that this exists in the media. I hate that someone with like me with a very modest size audience has been, really carrying the lion's share of the story, because bigger companies that have investigative journalists and legal teams on standby have been completely silent. So again, I don't blame Us Weekly, but I do blame these larger companies. I mean, because put it this way. Do you guys remember George Santos, the con artist who got elected into office? He essentially gets elected into office. And again, nothing about his story makes sense. He has different names and aliases, and he's lied about what college sports he played. Everything about him is a fraud. And the reason he got elected into office was because there was no local news to do the proper digging to expose who he was. And that's in part why someone's story like Clayton's almost didn't get told, because they needed some janky comedian running, shows out of his pajamas in his office here to tell the truth when others were afraid to. I mean, it's just absolutely bizarre. So here's Clayton's response. Thank you, Us Weekly, for covering this false accusation. I would be lying if I said it hasn't bothered me that more major outlets won't cover the truth. But they did cover it whenever it first came out, and there was the question of whether I was guilty or not. I ultimately want justice to be served, and getting the truth out to the masses is the best possible way of that happening. So essentially, we just had the Sun, who ran with the article, shared both sides, but did no legwork to find out any of their truths. Then you had an audience who actually cares about justice. That all comes together, the Justice for Clayton community, in the sort of throes of being sued and threatened with this and having their personal information exposed by Jane Doe. With all of that said, truth and the human condition came forward because people wanted justice. But I tell you what, it wasn't because of the psychopathic corporations. They wanted nothing to do with this story. They saw no upside, and they were willing to let Clayton get thrown under the bus. I'm sorry. It doesn't sit right with me, and I think in the grand scheme of things, we're going to look back at stories like this and go, if not Clayton, then who's next? Who's next that's not going to get their story told on a greater level? Because Clayton wasn't the first victim of hers. We had Greg, we had Mike, this guy Andrew. We had all these people, right? And they didn't have enough fame to have the story get told. And again, it wasn't fame that broke the case in his direction. It was fame that she used against him. It just so happened that audiences weren't going to let that fly. So that's Clayton's response. And now we have a psychologist named Dr. Berry who shares some of her thoughts. I guess she received a lot of encouragement from some of the audience for her to dive into this. Now, you have to understand, a psychologist, they've got degrees and they're registered to practice psychology. They're not allowed to just give armchair diagnosis on people they don't know. So she can't properly, I'm sure she's got her opinions, but she can't properly say, oh, Jane Doe's acting this way, she's doing this. But she can give us some professional insight. I'm going to play a few of those clips right now. If you want to listen to everything she has to say, it's the video is titled Psychologist Discusses Clayton Echard Pregnancy Hoax and Darvo. So we're going to get into the topic of Darvo, which is very fascinating. Have a listen.
My original hesitation with covering this case was that the Jane Doe in the case, I've heard stories of lawsuits being filed against creators and all of that. And so I will be referring to her as Jane Doe. And I want to make it very clear, this is my disclaimer, because we are just talking about what somebody in this type of situation, both Clayton and then also Jane Doe, what somebody might be experiencing in a situation like this. While I am a psychologist, I'm not able to give a psychological evaluation or.
All right, so there you see it. Even psychologists don't want to get sued frivolously. Although that would be, if she did get sued, all hell would break loose here. Don't go after the psychologist.
Behavior is really outrageous. We want to run to a psychological explanation when really the simplest answer might be somebody might just be doing this for just like there might not be a diagnosable psychological condition. And so we're definitely going to chat about this. If you would like a phenomenal overview.
Okay, so then she gives me some credit. Thank you so much, doctor. But she says, not all cases can we just give a psychological diagnosis. It could be that somebody wants chaos and chaos is what they get. Now, don't get me wrong. If someone just wants chaos, there's probably a psychological reason behind that. So it is going to lead back in one way or another to a mental issue. It is going to lead back. Whether or not they can properly diagnose that is, of course, another concern. So she goes through the press release, which we've already shared, and then begins to talk about Darvo, which is an acronym for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. And let's just listen to what she has to say about that.
I'll follow the psychology terms. And Darvo is deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. And what that means is that, and this is a form of gaslighting and manipulation, emotional abuse. I'm not saying that's what's happening in this case. This case just reminded me of this, and I thought this would be a good time for us to talk about it. So
I love by the way, I love the legal terms here. I'm not saying this reminds me of I'm not saying this is what she's doing, but it reminds me of such. I get it. I understand, doctor. I understand you can't just be diagnosing people from the YouTubes. That's for the comment section to do.
In any situation is unique. There are some strategies that some people deploy to deny their wrongdoing or attack on the offended.
And by the way, we know this whole time that Jane Doe has denied lying. She denied it in the article. She says I was pregnant. Maybe tomorrow we'll share that evidence. We have the evidence. Have we shared this with you guys yet? Leave a comment. I'm not too sure. But we have her evidence where she says I was pregnant on June 1st, 2023. We have that. We can go through it if you guys want. It's not that interesting. But that's her initial denial of her lying. And then, of course, she claims she's the victim in many different ways. She's the victim of Greg. She's the victim of Clayton. She's the victim of me. She's the victim of cyberbullying. She's the victim of literally no one listening to her podcast because they think that she's just victim. And she's gotten this far in life by playing the victim. A victim in the TEDx talk, a victim in Chicken Soup for the Soul. Everything's a victim with her. And I think she might enjoy the love she gets from others when they see her as a victim. I'm here to tell you, if you do good things in this world, you'll get love from others. It's the law of attraction. You don't need to do this. This is manufacturing victimhood. And that's just not the right way to go.
Reverse roles with the victim to make themselves the victim or the harmed person. And based on what I've heard, just based on the information I've seen, it sounds like from things I've heard, there have been allegations that she has like talked about feeling like she was gonna harm herself, or like there were all of these things that kind of came forward.
And I understand why she doesn't want to necessarily discuss this any deeper, but we've got the audio, right? We've got the audio where she said she was going to self-harm. She was going to harm herself if I didn't stop talking about her. And then that's why the FBI was called on, because of a wellness check. So we know she's done this.
That, in my opinion, are red flags.
Totally.
And that people, so like if somebody contacted me and was like, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. I would have somebody reach out like to check in on that person. I'm not going to do the thing they said just because they like make that threat.
Which is like extortion. It's really, in my belief, emotional abuse. When someone says, I'm going to hurt myself if you don't take your videos down. That to me is emotional abuse, because they're saying you need to do this or I will do that. That's control. And of course, with the when she threatened to extort Clayton, she was saying, I'm going to sue you for $1.4 million unless you do this. So it's the same type of deal. She uses what she can to control others.
So, all right. Darvo summarizes a consistent reaction and manipulation tactic used by people that are not safe. This term was coined by psychologist Dr. Freud. Freud? That's so funny. It's almost like Freud, but I think it's Freud, I don't know. Freyd in the 90s. I know, the 1900s, in the 90s. She worked to build an understanding of how and why those who were accused of harm, how and why they respond to those accusations.
And I look at it as this way. It's like when someone's backed into a corner. If someone's backed into a corner, the only way they can go is out, is pushing their way out. So it's kind of like that. You call somebody out, they deny it, and then they have to attack. They can't just deny it and stay there. They deny it and have to attack. Now, or they could admit to their wrongs and all of that, but that's not what's happening in this case.
And this specifically came out of studying essay. So like if somebody came out and said,
so by essay she means the form of assault we can't properly discuss here for fear of being demonetized. But it's a fantastic sort of way to describe the way some people act, this being abusers. And so she does a great job here.
I think they say they reached out to Jane Doe. I think it's at the end of this is where in response, the unnamed woman told us in a Thursday statement, my pregnancy was definitely confirmed on June 1st, 2023 by an urgent care facility. So she denies that she's lying about this or any of that. Like that is what she has said. And that's what we have.
So right. You can read closely into the doctor's eyes. She goes, that's what she said, and that's where we're at. So, all right, folks, look, I mean, I can't properly clip up such great sort of, longer form conversation about what Darvo is. So you can go listen to more of that. I just wanted to sort of highlight the other people in this space that are covering what might be going on here. It's important to know. It's important to know, when you put a name to some of these clinical terms and, then you can look at times when they're being used, whether it be on someone else or against you. And you have to realize, okay, I see what's going on here. Kid doesn't get candy. Kid has a temper tantrum. That's kind of what Darvo is, right? It's a temper tantrum on a much larger, sinister level. It's somebody who doesn't get what they want, or they're being accused of something, so they go absolutely crazy. And in my eyes, I don't know if this is Jane Doe, but in my eyes, I don't know if it's narcissism. Again, not an expert here, but what is it in Jane Doe's DNA that makes her think we're all dumb sons of bitches? What is it about her that makes her think she can lie to our faces and we'll just believe it? I think it's narcissism, because it's somebody who thinks they're smarter than everybody else. And I think that might be part of what narcissism is, right? When you think you're just better than, and you go, oh, they'll have to believe me because I can do this and I can get out of that. And maybe her whole life she's been rewarded. And again, I'm not a psychologist, so I can ask these questions, right? But maybe her whole life she's been rewarded with that candy. And finally, as an internet, we're all coming together saying, you're not getting our fucking candy, okay? You're not getting our candy. We don't believe you, and we're allowed to not believe you. Can you believe part of her lawsuit threats were for people not believing her? What world do we live in? Wild stuff. I'll be back at 12:15 Central Standard Time to do the private Patreon. If you guys want to continue to talk more about this, we've got a nice chat room going on in the private Patreon. I'll be over there. 12:15 Central Standard Time, patreon.com/Dave Neal. We'll be back right after this.